Hi, this is Evan here from latinum.org.uk on the last day of my 51st year on this planet. So tomorrow will be different. Maybe. Anyway, those of you who know, I have a website called latinum.org.uk and all my audio resources are now hosted on Patreon. And I've opened up a new review site where users can leave reviews, and I've received a particularly interesting one from Willow Grace, who lives in Hinterzarten, and I thought I'd read it to you. So she starts off and she says, "Superb quality and immense scope. I cannot thank and commend Evan der Milner enough for his contributions to learning Latin. His body of work is enormous, comprising thousands of recordings of Latin works, old and new, at all levels, produced consistently over more than a decade, and of very high quality, paying meticulous attention to critical but often neglected details, such as the inflection of word stress and the pronunciation of macrons. To this, Mr. der Milner adds an indefatigable pedagogical enthusiasm and imagination, ever seeking novel and better ways to enable and encourage people to speak Latin. There are, to be sure, other resources for learning to speak Latin, e.g. the book by John Troutman and the recent book from the Polis Institute Press, and various radio and video resources available online. These resources can indeed be useful and a useful complement to the offerings of Latinum. Nevertheless, they are limited in offering only a handful of dialogues each, all too quickly exhausted. To learn a spoken language requires hundreds of hours of immersion, ideally with consistent and precise enunciation and impeccable grammar. To my knowledge, only Mr. der Milner offers such a body of work for the serious Latin student. The offerings by Latinum span a wide range of abilities, and Mr. der Milner has been scrupulous in accommodating beginning and intermediate Latin learners with comprehensible works, such as the dialogues of De Uge and the works of Mima Maxi and Marjorie Fay. The dialogues of Corderius may also be counted. Such works are critical for bridging the gap between agricola, agricolae, masculine, to arma, virumque, cano. I myself, writes Willow Grace, she says, I myself received a university degree in Latin and ancient Greek, which I've taught informally for some 30 years. I've had the pleasure of close lifelong friends who also savour Homer and Horace and Catullus and Sappho, and other gems of that lost world. Yet most of us have other professions. I am a physicist, and we complain among ourselves how slowly we read Latin in comparison to our modern languages. I have come to believe that learning Latin as we did, through our eyes and minds alone, hampers our reading, and that learning to speak Latin, as one might learn French or German, is the royal road to fluency. Hence, I have undertaken to relearn Latin verbally, which I am enjoying immensely. Several students of mine are also enthusiastic, and we are meeting once a week for lunch and colloquia latina. So thank you, Mr. der Milner. So that's a review I was very heartened to receive. It actually just came through today, and pretty much sums up what Latinum is all about. There's been an enormous amount of research, and I read the research on language learning and try to implement some of the new things as they are discovered. But there's an enormous amount of research because we're now able to scan people's brains down to the level of the activity of individual neurons, and see what's going on. And it's very interesting that when you are listening to a language being spoken by somebody else, your brain is as active as when you are speaking it yourself. So listening is almost as good as speaking. And what's also interesting with Latin is that when you are listening, you are forced to deal with the language in the order that it is presented to you. In other words, if you have a text, it's very tempting to play hunt the verb and so on, and try to deconstruct the sentence and then reassemble it in a different form so you can translate it into English. Well, that's not reading Latin. That's something else completely different. That's like playing chess. A Roman spoke and other Romans listened and they heard. Cicero spoke, Cicero spoke in the Senate, and he spoke as his texts are written down. People had no trouble understanding him. We can do it. Right? Latin is no more difficult than Russian, for example, or Lithuanian or other inflected languages, or Bengali even, a similar language with a case structure. So if you want to get good at it, you need to read an enormous amount. Now, we live very busy lives, and so it's hard to sit down and read. It's much easier just to stick in your earbuds and listen to somebody else reading. You're far more likely to cover the ground. Also, some of the texts that I use don't have very user-friendly forms. In other words, they're only found in Google Book scans, often of texts from the 18th century or earlier. And these are not the easiest texts to read unless you're used to reading texts written in those typefaces. So I do the hard work for you. And of course, I'm also very careful with the pronunciation of the length of the vowels, etc. And most of the texts don't have this information in them. So that's all. There's an enormous amount on Latinum, hundreds and hundreds of hours of audio, and I'm working on it more and more. So the amount of material increases. For example, I've recently put out part of Lomon's Historiae Sacrae, which will be finished soon. And then I've got a request list from my members, and I'm going to start working my way through some of the requests. So that's from me and from latinum.org.uk. Bye.